Hello, we're John and Elizabeth.
Hello.
We're in Milford Haven, and we've been having a little bit of a day sail with the idea of giving Elizabeth a little bit more hands-on with the skippering side of things.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.
Well, Elizabeth, what's it like to be in the driving seat?
Interesting. It's quite tricky around here because of all these tankers.
It's a bit busy, isn't it?
Yeah. And various yachts.
And very. We arrived in Milford Haven a couple of days ago, and we've spent a couple of days at anchor and a couple of days inside the marina itself. And it's a very lovely little cruising ground if you can get beyond the oil infrastructure, or the oil and gas infrastructure.
And the ferry.
The ferries. But we were here a little bit earlier than we'd intended. The weather sort of drove that, and we were going to be leaving the boat here for a day or two, so we had some, I wouldn't say time to kill, but we had some time where we didn't need to get from A to B. We could stay in the one place, and that really gave us an opportunity to swap things around a bit. I think, like most couples who sail, the jobs tend to fall.
I feel quite familiar with doing the deck work.
Yeah.
But not so much the navigation or the helming.
Particularly in close quarters to either ships or the land.
Yeah.
So we just had a day, literally, pottering around from the highest reaches of the haven all the way up to Dale Harbour, or Dale Anchorage, with Elizabeth very much in the driving seat, and it's been a good opportunity to have a conversation about different things that happen, and particularly, you're very familiar with working the plotter when we're on a reasonable length passage, but when there's a million buoys and ships and...
I was going to say, the other thing is, I think it just might be the way my brain works, but looking at the plotter, it's looking north, isn't it? So
yes,
I'm having to really think about. I'm looking. It looks as though I'm going into very shallow water there.
Yeah, but you aren't. You're
I'm not.
You're
Yeah.
absolutely bang on, right in the middle of the channel, deepest bit of water. Yeah, so we run the plotter in a north up mode because that's by and large the way you look at a chart. But that sometimes is unhelpful when you're pointing in one direction and things appear to be on the wrong side. But it's been very helpful. The other thing that we're going to do today is we're going to head up the river and spend a bit of time handling the boat under power, which again, because normally when we're entering or leaving a harbour or a berth or coming onto an anchoring, I tend to do it, but we'll just practice that a little bit and give ideally a bit more experience at handling the boat under power.
Yeah,
which,
maybe increasing my confidence as well.
Yeah, should be good. Right, and it's a not nicer day than it was earlier this morning. Got up this morning, it was properly piddling down. The sun is trying to make a breakthrough-ish. We'd spent a night or two at anchor very far up the river where it was extremely sheltered, and as we got to the western part of the harbour entrance it got a little bit more lively, quite sheltered in some of the bays on the western edge, but Dale Harbour itself, or Dale Anchorage itself, was a little bit breezy. Milford Haven is quite a pretty sort of place, and obviously a lot of history, but there's also awful lot of oil and gas infrastructure there, which sort of lasts all the way up to the bridge. We had a very relaxed morning and most of the afternoon actually just treating the boat like a big dinghy and travelling up and down the harbour. Basically just giving Elizabeth familiarity handling the boat in close quarters to shipping, voyage, and indeed the shore.
It was a really nice day yesterday, and we weren't in much of a rush to get anywhere, so it gave a good opportunity to handle the boat in closely confined conditions, close to buoys, close to the shore, for Elizabeth, who isn't normally on the helm when we're either coming into harbour or doing anything like that, because, as she says, she's Mrs. Foredeck. It reminded me there's a few things that are worth thinking about. And first of all, every boat is different. This boat handles very differently from a modern fin-keeled cruiser or a bilge keeler, and you should practice these things on a boat and in different conditions, and we got a bit of a chance to do that yesterday. So a couple of things worth thinking about. First of all, boats don't turn like cars. There's a couple of factors. One is that there is a pivot point, and you need to find it for your boat, and it changes very slightly. But the boat, as you turn it, the bow will go round and the stern will kick out, and the boat will pivot about a point at the middle. That's really important when you're close to other objects, because if the tide or the wind is taking you in a particular direction and you put too much helm over, there is a chance of kicking the stern into something else. So something to beware of. The other one, particularly on this boat, is there is a very pronounced prop walk effect, where when the stern goes, when the engine goes astern, the stern itself will kick out to port. I've heard a number of reasons why that might be. Somebody said to me it's a paddle wheel effect, that the action of the propeller turning around acts like a paddle wheel. I'm not sure I believe that, because the whole thing's underwater. Other people have said to me it's to do with water density and lower, and again, I don't believe that either, because it's all a bit too shallow or too little difference. What I do, and what works for me, is the idea that as the propeller is going astern, it is pushing water up onto the underside of the hull, and that is causing the hull to move. So as the propeller goes astern, push of water up pushes the stern to port, and that is happening as the boat goes forward. But very often when you're going forward at such a speed that the rudder then counteracts that effect. But that prop walk effect is there forward and astern. It's maybe just a bit more pronounced astern.
Just to reiterate prop walk with the use of a diagram, imagine we've got the propeller turning and we're propelling ahead. As the propeller turns round clockwise, it pushes water up onto the transom. That pushes the stern to starboard, and the bow therefore goes to port. Now, when the boat is going astern, and this is where the effect is much more pronounced, the water is being pushed up onto the starboard side, and that pushes the stern to port, and that can drag the stern quite violently to port at slow speed.
The manoeuvre Elizabeth and I were practicing around a buoy up at the upper reaches of the river was to turn the boat in as confined space as possible. And I've done this where you might have to go into a marina and then come back out, or you have to turn around up there. And you can turn this boat in quite a confined space by approaching close to the port side of the channel, turning hard to starboard. As you turn hard to starboard, put the engine into a stern, and the prop walk will then continue the turn, keep the rudder over in the same direction, and then as you get through about 2/3 of the turn, then put the engine into a head, and by and large you will come back down just a few yards to the side of where you went up. That works really well in a confined space.
And again, just show you this in diagrammatic form before demonstrating it. As you approach, for example, a buoy or in a narrow channel, as you approach it, the pivot point and the rudder goes over in order to turn the boat to starboard. The pivot point then works there, and you can see the boat start to turn. But then when you're about a third of the way into the turn, put the engine hard into a stern, and the stern will then move to port, and that will accelerate the turn. The rudder stays in the same place until you straighten up. Selecting where to do these drills is really tricky, and we were picking this place just below Castle Reach. We had a flood tide and a northerly breeze, but it was close enough that we could see enough visual references. So the white buoy that you can see in the middle of the screen there, that was the one that we were going to practice around, and you need to have good visual reference. So for the closely confined turn, Elizabeth simply steadied up on a prominent point, and actually there was a little bit of a castle up to the north of us that you can't quite see here, but she motored up to that with a view of getting reasonably close to this buoy, just to make sure that we could spot just exactly how much transfer actually happened on the boat. So as she approached it, she knocked the boat into neutral, put the helm hard over, the bow started to swing. She then put the engine into a stern, and you can see the disturbed water there on the starboard quarter, nice and calm on the port quarter. That's the water coming up as the engine's going astern. The bow continues to swing quite quickly, and then at about this point, when we're about 2/3 done, Elizabeth then goes down there and then puts the boat back into a head again, and all the time the rudder has stayed hard over to port. As we then start to aim back down towards the buoy. Now, because of the tide, we advanced quite a long way, but the transfer was very small.
The other turn that we practiced is the Williamson turn, which is a turn that you might do if you had to go back up your original track. We didn't cover this on the man overboard episode the other day, but if the man overboard went over whilst you were motoring and you weren't able to heave to, then your way of returning back up your original track is to conduct a Williamson turn. So you basically turn 70 degrees hard over, and as you approach 70 degrees off your original heading, you reverse the helm and then head back up the reciprocal. So by way of an example, we were heading 180, we came hard to port, we were steering 110. As we approached 110, we reversed the helm again, went all the way through 180 and then back up to north, and that would take us straight back up the track. And we could see the knuckle in the water where we'd put the helm over, and we knew that we were heading straight back up the original track. Very useful technique, and does turn you in quite a short, quite a small area. It's a bit too adventurous, because it benefits from having a lot of speed, and it means heading right into things that are close to you. So two different sorts of turns.
What we're talking about here is the Williamson turn. There are others. Anderson is one, some other names, but we were heading due south, and we put the helm hard over, and we were turning 70 degrees round to about 110. As we approached that, we reversed the helm hard. By the way, the revs stay the same all the way through this. That's pretty important. But what happens is we then turn the boat through more than the 180 degrees, obviously 180 plus 70, and the boat then starts to turn back up towards the reciprocal. So we'll end up heading north, and we will end up in a position very much close to the start point. And we practiced this a few times. That was us heading south. The helm goes hard over, and it takes a bit of effort to push it all the way over. As you come 70 degrees off, reverse the helm and push it really hard over, keeping the revs on, and the boat will then turn all the way around. And just as we come round here, you should get the opportunity to see the little knuckle in the water there, which is our track on the way down, and we essentially head straight back up our original track. Very useful if you want to go back exactly the way you came out. Boats like Contessa 32s are notorious for not behaving themselves going astern, so we practiced that for a little while as well. So we found ourselves a nice bit of water, started to propel astern, gently increased the revs, and one of the things that I absolutely recommend at this point is that you're very careful in terms of where you stand. I would stand forward of the tiller itself, grasping it quite firmly, and being very careful not to put too many revs on, because sometimes the rudder can kick quite badly, and can move you around a bit. But we practiced motoring up into the wind and pulling the stern out of the wind on either side, and we could see just exactly how, well, not exactly, but we could see how she behaved and how it was a little bit unpredictable. But it was a very useful experience, motoring astern at speed.
Yes.
So having practiced the various turns and handling the boat under power, it was then time to sort of bring it all together, and this was the approach to a mooring buoy. In this particular case, I very much recommend standing astride the tiller. It allows you to stay on the centre line, control where the boat is. You've got easy access to the throttle. You can just see, and I'm afraid the flicker doesn't help here, you can see the boat speed and the speed over the ground. And also looking out to the side, we were looking for the transit to see if we were actually moving forward, because as described earlier, we had a wind against tide situation. Tide was setting us knot and a half one way, the wind was probably blowing the same. So it was important to monitor the speed, and we started to approach from a reasonable distance a mooring buoy. We approached very much in the same line as all of the other sailing vessels that were similar to us were lying. So we could see motorboats were very much lying to the wind, but sailing vessels were very much lying to the tide. So we approached on that line, kept checking our bearings off to one side, and approached nice and gently.
Now try to judge moving below.
So we had a few approaches at this, all slightly different angles and speeds. I would very much recommend approaching mooring buoys and indeed jetties about as slow as you can do. Now, I don't deny for a minute, every now and again you need a bit of speed, but the slower you can keep the boat in the right place, the less you will cause the crew to have to work quite hard. And the last thing you want to do at this point is lose the boat hook or indeed the bowman as you approach. But at this point, Elizabeth's got it very nicely under control, approaching very, very slowly. The buoy is gently dropping through the guardrails and is steady against the stanchions, showing good control. Normally we pick up on the starboard side exactly like the man overboard, just because a judicious burst of a stern can help twist the boat, but this is a very nice approach indeed.
Now I think I would be able to grab that.
We couldn't find a suitable jetty to practice alongside. But we headed over to Dale, but it was blowing about 20 knots of breeze and it was quite bouncy, and therefore we decided that yesterday wasn't the right day. There will be another opportunity for that. But talking to Elizabeth, she said she got quite a lot from handling the boat on her own, and I think would you say you're more prepared to do it now?
I think I'm more prepared to do it as long as I have you in the background giving me instructions. I think it's more confidence than ability.
It's confidence, and it was definitely a confidence building exercise, and we should have done it more frequently, but we've got going now. I guess the main thing that I'm saying in this is it is terribly easy to pick up jobs and stick to them and not share those jobs around and share the learning and the expertise. Every time we've been going somewhere, it's been somewhere new, and therefore there's been the additional anxiety of where is it, where are things, how does it lay out. We spent a few days here, got familiar with it. Good time to take a training opportunity for the rest of the crew, and I would recommend that you do much the same. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been useful. And up pops the chef.
Thank you.